Hello and thanks for tuning in. This is a little video workshop, if you will, called Mastodon and Beyond, Our Federated Future. My name is Bart Everson. I'm a creative generalist at the Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Faculty Development here at Xavier University of Louisiana. And this workshop was originally offered 16 March 2023. Which is my mother's birthday, but that's beside the point. The main reason I mentioned the date is that, as is often the case with this technological stuff, things are changing very rapidly. And the information in this presentation was current at the time that I recorded it, but if you're too far in the future, you might want to double check some things. Also, I'll mention a number of resources. You don't have to write them down. There will be no quiz afterwards. And we have compiled some of these resources for you on our wiki. You see the address there. If you just go to catwiki.xula.edu, you should be able to find us. Just look under Mastodon and you'll find these resources. So, let's get started, shall we? I wanted to begin with kind of my story. My personal fascination with social media really goes a ways back. I did a workshop on Twitter here at Xavier in early 2008 and another on social network sites that fall. And behind me you can see a panoply of screenshots from various social network sites that I covered in that workshop. I felt kind of ambivalent, though, about all these platforms, really. I found Twitter a little intriguing, but I had my own personal blog, you see, that I established in 2004. So that was my preferred platform, for publishing content out there on the internet. It seemed like social media was bringing this power to the people, though, and, that seemed exciting. So it seemed. The real value of social media for me was proven with Hurricane Gustav, actually. You may remember the date. It was exactly the anniversary of Katrina 3 years later. I remember it very well because my daughter was just a few months old. So that makes it 2008. And we actually evacuated for this one. There's a picture of her sleeping in the car. We were desperate for information. And we found information about what was going on in New Orleans on the ground, reliable, up-to-date, up-to-the-minute information. We found it on Twitter. And in fact, we weren't the only ones. There was a story about this in the Chicago Tribune about how many people who'd evacuated for Gustav were looking to Twitter for information. And this was before what we came to know as hashtag NOLA Twitter. To put it in more of a academic context, though, there's a similar value that many have found in, let's look at the sciences in particular, what's known as science Twitter. And the idea, of course, has been that Twitter could be a good platform for sharing information related to your academic scholarly research. According to Nature, the famous journal, there's a community of about 500,000 researchers on Twitter. Primarily, they're looking at the sciences, I believe. To try to visualize that, I did find a graphic that, believe it or not, there's 1 million dots on this graphic, supposedly. I haven't counted them all. Of course, we're talking about 500,000, but that still is a lot of people. However, there's some problems with social media. I think we know, on the whole, the influence of social media on society, especially on socialization, seems to have been negative. And here I'm quoting from Andrew C. Oliver, writing for InfoWorld. People have raised a number of issues with Facebook, such as the manipulation of users, the ubiquity of annoying ads, fake news. One person's content moderation is another person's censorship, but Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram seem to have utterly failed at moderating content in any way acceptable to anyone. In many cases, they seem to encourage misinformation, fake news, and even hate speech in order to drive engagement. Social media, also, my personal beef was that it seemed to suck all the oxygen from the blogosphere. So you can see here a chart of the declining relevance, or the declining traffic anyway, to my own personal blog from Hurricane Gustav onward. Just a long, slow loss of readership because people were getting busy, presumably on social media. But my disillusion really came to a head when I read Digital Minimalism. Cal Newport recommends doing something called a digital declutter. And I did that with my supervisor, Dr. Elizabeth Yost Hammer, in the spring of 2019. We eliminated all optional technology from our lives for 1 month. And then we only brought back the stuff that we really served our deepest personal values. And social media really didn't make the cut. And I found I didn't really miss it. And in the clarity that came from that exercise, I kind of felt like this had been a big 10-year mistake, all this fascination with social media, and I felt like a real prize chump. Because after all, I had been involved with a couple of interviews with the famous academic Noam Chomsky. I was familiar with his critique of old school media, that it's pretty obvious. Corporate media is going to serve the interests of the people who own it. And that's no less true of this modern social media. It follows exactly the same principles. So I felt like a prize fool. Of course, our friends at the Electronic Frontier Foundation remind us that to rely on these major platforms is to lose critical autonomy over your privacy, your security, and your free expression. Well, I first became aware of something called Mastodon when I was running for public office. You may remember my great campaign slogan from 2021, "Make New Orleans Cool Again." A fellow Green Party activist was telling me about this, what he called the elephant site. And when my campaign was done in December, I created an account. I looked around, I didn't really understand it, and I just kind of left it alone. But I took a second look, as many people did, after Elon Musk purchased Twitter and all the disruptions that occurred around that time. We're talking November of 2022 now. And the hashtag RIP Twitter started trending, not for the first time. And I took a second look at Mastodon, and I found, I was a lot more intrigued. This second time, I got a little bit more appreciation for what was actually going on there. And that's actually, of course, the subject of this entire workshop. But first, some caveats. I want to emphasize I'm not a salesman for Mastodon. Your reaction to all of this, to social media as a whole, might be to shrug, like my daughter did. This is a picture from 10 years ago. She's a teenager now, but she still would shrug and say, who cares, or why bother about any of this stuff? And if that's your reaction, more power to you. I'm not here to say that everybody needs to get on Mastodon. It's been hyped somewhat as a Twitter replacement, but that's a bit of a false premise. In fact, if you're looking for an exact Twitter clone or Twitter replacement, you'll probably be disappointed. It's not another Twitter, Facebook, whatever. Each of these things has its own particular history and its own particular characteristics. And it's probably best to regard Mastodon as its own thing with its own history and its own set of capabilities, and not to necessarily expect it to be a one-to-one replacement for anything else. Also, you should be aware that this guy, Tom Gillespie, said he doesn't see Mastodon as the future. Now, you may wonder, who is Tom Gillespie? Well, he's kind of my cyber guru, my new media mentor, the director of my graduate program from many years ago. And so you might put some stock in what he says, although you have to ask, Would you trust a guy who looks like this? That actually is his avatar on Mastodon. And he has backpedaled a little bit since then. He said he takes back any bad things he ever said about Mastodon once he got into it and really took a deep dive. But his objection was that it was a little too complicated to get started. And if a guy like Tom Gillespie feels that way, it does have to give you pause. But with this workshop, you'll be well equipped to take the plunge if you so desire. Also, you might find, some of the criticism with Mastodon is that it's just not as exciting as some of these other social media platforms, that there aren't that many people there. It's kind of like an empty parking lot. Boring. It is true that Twitter and Facebook and these big commercial social media platforms are designed to elicit the highest level of engagement possible, to keep us coming back for more. And Mastodon is not. So if that equates to boring in your book, well, maybe it is. Again, I'm not a salesman. On the other hand, we should consider the strongest possible case for Mastodon, the strongest one that I've seen out there, particularly for academics now, is this article, this journal article that's published, Mastodon Over Mammon, which makes the argument that we need to make a move to publicly owned scholarly knowledge, and that Mastodon is the best way to do that, kind of in keeping with the movement for open educational resources. So we'll share this link on the wiki, as I mentioned, and it's worth a look. But as I've said repeatedly now, I'm not a salesman. Not to put too fine a point on it, but is it possible for me to be perceived as neutral on this topic? Probably not, but I'd like to try. Moving along, enough with the preliminaries. You want to know, what is this thing called Mastodon? Well, of course, a mastodon was an animal that once roamed this planet, now extinct. But what you may not know is that Mastodon is also an extreme metal band that is named after the animal, obviously. The social media platform is named after the band. Fun fact. Mastodon as a social media platform was invented by this guy, Eugene Rochko, back in 2016. And the big innovation is that there is no single centralized server. It's a network of decentralized servers. It's completely decentralized. If you think of Twitter, you go to one place, twitter.com. Facebook, the same thing. You go to facebook.com. But Mastodon runs on a decentralized network of many servers, hundreds of servers, thousands of servers, in fact. They call it the Fediverse. And Mastodon is not the only application that can run on this network of servers. There are many others, but Mastodon is just the most famous right now. Wikipedia defines it as an ensemble of federated or interconnected servers for web publishing, for file hosting. They're all independently hosted, right, on these hundreds and thousands of servers, but they can all communicate with each other. And the implications, as I've said, cannot be overstated. What this means is that no single entity can own the Fediverse, or Mastodon for that matter. No single entity can control it. And that, as you can imagine, is a complete paradigm shift from what we're used to seeing with big corporate social media. Now, I said Mastodon's only one app. Well, I'm not going to get into all these other apps, but this illustration does a nice job of showing a kind of family tree, if you will, of many different kind of applications that run on the Fediverse. And you'll see down at the bottom of the tree there, the roots of the tree, ActivityPub. That is another term to be aware of. That's the protocol that all of this stuff runs on. A lot of it anyway. And we're not going to get into the finer technical points, just something to know. The rise of the Fediverse has got some people very excited. So this article appeared by Michael Quett saying this could be the end of big social media. This was published just on March 2nd. But hold your horses, because just a few days later, another big announcement dropped. Meta is looking at getting into the Fediverse. Yes, Meta, that's right. The owners of Facebook are looking at launching their own version of Mastodon, if you will. This could have huge implications, and this is still breaking news. So this presentation that I'm doing for you could need some very big updates very soon. Now, every social media platform has its norms and expectations, and I mentioned earlier the problems with moderation and hate speech and so forth on some of the big platforms. So where's Mastodon stand on this? Well, most Mastodon servers have to subscribe to what's called the Mastodon Server Covenant, and the very first point in that covenant is active moderation against racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia. It further states, as you see, users must have the confidence that they are joining a safe space free from white supremacy, anti-Semitism, and transphobia of other platforms. If that's not clear enough, Eugene Rochko, the inventor, again, of Mastodon, has said that hate speech limits the freedom of expression of others. Thus, he's been described as kind of the anti-Elon Musk. And way back in 2017, a noted journalist praised Mastodon, the biggest Mastodon server, for explicitly banning Nazis. She also said Mastodon is definitely not the free speech wing of the free speech party. Now, I certainly support freedom of speech, and I hope you do too. But when it comes to social media, do you want a free speech zone or a safe space? And the decentralized, community-based moderation is supposed to make Mastodon into that safe space. But the big question still remains, does it work? It's been tested a number of times, but I think we have to say that the jury is still out. We'll see as Mastodon continues to grow. All right, let's say I've piqued your curiosity sufficiently that you want to check this out yourself. There are a few things to consider. In fact, even people who are not going to be on Mastodon may wish to know a few things about the. First and foremost, the big speed bump is choosing a server. This is the one thing that slows people down the most. As I mentioned, there are hundreds, actually there are thousands of servers that are out there. So how do you do it? Well, you might choose an education-related Mastodon server. You might even be able to find a Mastodon server that's kind of dedicated to your particular academic discipline. That could be a good home for you. Now keep in mind, no matter what server you choose, you're going to be able to interact with every other server. But it does have implications. Kind of nice to be on a server that is run by folks and used by folks who have similar interests to you. This is not absolutely necessary, though. You might also want to check out a number of servers that are run by moderators of color. And hopefully, given the fact that I'm giving this presentation at a historically black college, I don't need to elaborate on why that's important. It should be pretty well understood. And finally, I'll mention a few other servers. Mastodon.social and Mastodon.social, those two on top, are a couple of the biggest servers. There's nothing wrong with establishing an account on those, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's generally not recommended. You might get lost in the shuffle, so to speak. You don't need to labor under the delusion that that's where all the action is and that's where you need to be. It's not the case. In fact, if you ever need any help from an administrator, you might not get the same level of service on one of those big servers. But below that, you'll see a couple of much smaller servers that I can recommend. Po'boy.social, as the name implies, is a local New Orleans flavored server run by a guy here in New Orleans, stand-up guy. I can vouch for him. Also flow.earth. That's the server I'm on. That's flow like an ice flow. It's dedicated to climate action, but we talk about a lot of other things on there too. And that's where I established my account. So if you're interested in getting started on either of those servers or any of these others, go ahead. They all work. Don't let this speed bump slow you down too much. There are indices of all the servers that are out there. None of them are exhaustive or complete, but you will find a couple of those links in our wiki. A word also about the apps. You can get started on the web, right? Or you might want to get started on an app, and I would say it's a split between some people use Mastodon more on an app on their phone, some people use it more on the web, some people do both. But if you do use an app on your phone, don't go for the default app that's called Mastodon. People generally concede it's not necessarily the best user experience. You might try something like, there's a number of third-party apps that have been developed that work on Mastodon. On Android, you might try Tusky, for example. On iOS, you might try Metatext, but there are others that are out there. Download a couple, see what you like. Here's a screenshot, just to give you a for instance, of what Mastodon looks like on my phone using Tusky. And you will run into a potential gotcha, especially as you're just getting started. If you start out on the web and you're perking along and things are just fine, and then you install an app on your phone and you launch it, and you're invited to log in with the server where you created your account. Yes, that's right. Remember, there are hundreds, no thousands of different servers. So when you log in, you're going to need to know what your server is. So finally, you've done it all. You've set up your account, and you're looking at a blank screen. Why is that? Well, because once you start, you're not following anybody. There are no advertisements on Mastodon. There's no algorithm. It's not designed to drive engagement. So what that means is, as people put it, you are the algorithm. You fill up your home screen by following people who are posting content that you're interested in. And until you do that, your screen's going to be blank. So that's a difference from big social media for sure. That leads us to the next thing. Where are all the people? You may be searching around, and you may feel like a ghost town at first. But one important way of finding people on Mastodon is to understand the structure of what we would call the Mastodon handle, I guess. It's got that double @ symbol. The first @ is for your username, your handle. Mine is editor. This is a little graphic that I developed to advertise my handle to people on Twitter and Facebook, and just to let them know that they probably won't see me that much on there anymore. Come and join me on Mastodon if you wish. The second part, though, the second @ specifies your server. So as I mentioned before, I'm on flow.earth. I'm editor on flow.earth. And if you specify that whole handle with both at signs, you'll see it on your profile, by the way. You can find anybody if you know their full Mastodon handle. And you just punch that into the Mastodon search, and you will find that person exactly where they are. Now, that brings up the whole issue of search. Basically, you can't just do a full text search on Mastodon. It's an anti-harassment feature. They found that trolls, bad actors, will search for people that they don't agree with, people that they don't like, identities that they want to harass. And that's what we want to try to avoid, right? So search works only for hashtags. The moral of the story is use hashtags to find and to be found. If you want a particular term to show up in search, hashtag it. That's how you'll find people who are talking about that. That's how those people will find you. All right, let's see how this works with a live demonstration. I'm going to give you a quick tour of the interface, the web interface. So I'm going to open a new tab. And remember, my server, by now you know, is flow.earth. That's the whole address. If I go there, I'll see this. And it tells me that it's a Mastodon server for facing the climate crisis without going insane. So we talk about other things too. And I have a button here to actually go to the Mastodon instance on flow.earth. And here I see, it's the home screen, right? So here's the most recent post is by John Bull. Who's this John Bull guy? I don't remember following this guy. Well, that's because I'm not signed in, right? I haven't signed in on this computer yet, so this is not really what I'm looking for. I need to sign in. You'll notice, of course, that I'm signing into flow.earth. I'm signing into my server. If it said sign in to mastodon.social, this wouldn't work. And now my home screen shows the most recent stuff from people that I'm actually following. And we see a post here from Bread and Circuses. A study has been completed that asks and answers some very important questions, and it's talking about global inequality, it's talking about climate change, and there's a link to an article and so forth. So this gives you an idea of what I might see when I get onto social media. You notice that's longer than a tweet. Mastodon by default is 500 characters, which is quite a bit longer than what Twitter now allows. Some servers allow even more. Let's take a look, though, at the menu. You'll see on the right-hand side, the home notifications. I can see here recent notifications that people have boosted a recent post of mine, that they favorited a recent post of mine. A boost is, if you're familiar with Twitter, a boost is kind of like a retweet, and a favorite is kind of like a liking, but there's no algorithm. When you boost something, it goes out to your followers. But if you just favorite something, that just lets the person who posted it know that you liked it. It doesn't make it go up to the top of the heap in some kind of algorithmic way. Let's go to the Explore tab. So this is stuff that's popular or whatever on flow.earth right now. And that's where the John Bull post comes from. And on the other hand, if we go to the local tab, this is just stuff that's being posted by people on flow.earth. Now, as I mentioned, there's only, last time I checked, about 60 people on the server. So we see a guy named Xavier, no relation to Xavier University of Louisiana, I should add. A guy named Xavier seems to be on a roll. He, within the last hour, has posted a number of posts. They call them toots in Mastodon, by the way.
Yeah, they do.
My supervisor, Elizabeth Yost Hammer, thinks that's somewhat improper. If we look under the Federated tab, we'll see the entire Fediverse, or at least the parts of the Fediverse that are connected most directly to this server. And as we can imagine, there's going to be a lot more traffic under this tab, right? Even in the time that I'm talking to you, new items are showing up. You see, it says 3 new items. It's not showing them by default, but if I click, it'll show those 3 new items, and I would have to, scroll up all the way to see them all. And then, of course, direct messages. Yes, you can send direct messages to people. It's not encrypted, so don't share state secrets this way. My favorites would be listed here, as I mentioned before. This is just a way of letting people know that you like something, but you can also find all your favorites indexed here. You can also bookmark posts. And you notice bookmarks don't, I think, notify the original poster at all, but it's a way of finding stuff that you particularly want to come back to later. So there was an interesting post I saw this morning about GPT-4, which has just been launched, as you know. And this guy's perspective seemed interesting. I wanted to come back to it when I had more presence of mind. There are lists, and I've made a couple lists, but that feature is pretty rudimentary and we don't have time to get into it. And there, of course, are preferences. And I'm certainly not going to go through all the wealth of preferences, except to say that the defaults are pretty good. I didn't want animated GIFs to automatically play in my timeline, so I turned that off. But the defaults are pretty good. It's here that you can set, for example, that you'd only want to see posts in English, because there are a lot of different languages on the Fediverse and in Mastodon. Let's go over here then finally to the left-hand side. We have the search feature. We mentioned that hashtags are a good way to search. You don't have to put in a hashtag when you do a search, but it does narrow down to say, I just want to look for those things. GPT-4, as I mentioned, is it's just been launched, so you can see that a number of people have been talking about that lately. And here we see a post here. Somebody's talking about some of the positive aspects of GPT-4 in its ability to describe images, perhaps for the vision impaired, what have you, and other information about GPT-4. So this could, this is something that's happening right now. And as we know from our experiences on other social media platforms, that's one of the most interesting things about social media is to see what people are saying right now. I'm not saying that it's going to be that we've quite got to the point yet where it's going to do for us what Twitter did during Hurricane Gustav, but maybe someday. Yes, Dr. Stoll.
Can you just hit a hashtag oh boy social, since those are mostly New Orleans people?
Well,
it would not, that way?
Unless people are hashtagging it, it's not going to show up that way.
Okay.
So if I do a search for poboy.social, here's what you'll see. You'll see people who are on poboy.social. Now there's more than four or five, I'm pretty sure, but anyway, that's what you see.
Okay, thank you.
So here we have the box where you actually would publish a post, or as you might see on some of the apps on your phone, make a toot. What's on your mind? You can type anything here. You can also attach a file. This is where you would add an image, let's say. You can make a poll, ask people a question, right? You can decide whether you want your post to be public or some other privacy options. You have the ability to add a CW, content warning, or some people call it a content wrapper. So I might want to say, for example, I'm actually doing a workshop on the topic of Mastodon for Xavier faculty and staff right now. I have the ability then to add what's called a content warning or a content wrapper. I could put, maybe I want to hide this. This would hide this away so that people don't see it. I could say, I'm just demonstrating. Now you could use this feature for sensitive content. Maybe you're talking about something that you think is disturbing, or that people don't want to necessarily see in their feed. Or maybe it's just like, you're talking about U.S. politics, and not everybody's into U.S. politics, something like that.
It makes me think of like spoilers, like if you're talking about a movie and you give something away and people are like, no, I want to see it.
Exactly. So you would put spoiler warning in the CW there, or you could, if it's a joke, you could put a riddle. You put the question and then the answer. So if I publish this, click publish, and then go to my home, it should be, okay, a few new items, need to scroll up all the way. Just demonstrating, show more. Oh, yes, that's how it works. So don't be afraid to use the CW is my point. Now there are something called groups. We're not going to have time to get into that. That's just to be something to be aware of. That you, in particular, there is the edututors, and you now understand that terminology. The edututors group. I said we weren't going to have time to get into it, but I'm getting into it. If you follow the edututors group, you'll get everything that's posted to that group every time somebody tags them in a post. And as you can discern from the name edututors, it's basically people on Mastodon who are talking about education. Faculty developers, educational developers, just educators in various sorts. And you can see some examples of the kind of content that gets shared in this group as we scroll down. And if this is your kind of thing, then you would want to follow edututors. It's just that simple. So to wrap this up, I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. The images that you've seen are generally public domain, Creative Commons licensed for my own work, except for, of course, the corporate logos, the screenshots of various news sites and whatnot. Hopefully those are covered under fair use. And also that Tweet Your Science illustration, I did my damnedest. I could not find out where it came from, but I put a link there from my best guess. I'm not sure what kind of, I'm not sure who created it exactly. This presentation, though, is published under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 international license, as most all of our content here at CAT is. So thanks for your attention. Thanks for watching. If you want more information, of course, if you want those links that I've referenced in this presentation, check out our wiki, or just go to CAT Wiki and you'll be able to find us there.